What if the scariest horror story on the internet was never just a story? A Soviet experiment, a sealed room, and 5 men who were never meant to wake up. Not prisoners, not volunteers, ghosts, trapped in a concrete tomb, where sleep was forbidden and sanity wasn't welcome. They weren't studied. They were broken. No one was supposed to hear their screams. No one was supposed to remember them. And yet, somehow their story escaped. This is the Russian sleep experiment, a modern myth soaked in paranoia and dread. But beneath the surface, beneath the blood, the gas, the madness, lies a deeper question. What makes a lie feel like truth? Why do we believe in monsters that never existed? And why do some stories refuse to die? What you're about to hear isn't just a tale of horror. It's a journey into the space between fact and fiction, where fear grows in the dark. And sometimes, an idea is enough to haunt the world. A chilling narrative of the Russian sleep experiment begins shrouded in the grim atmosphere of the late 1940s, a period when the Iron Curtain had descended firmly across Europe, casting a long shadow over the Soviet Union. Within the secretive and often brutal regime, 5 individuals, stripped of their names and dignity and branded as mere enemies of the state, were presented with an extraordinary, albeit terrifying, proposition. Their path to freedom, or so they were led to believe, hinged on a single, harrowing condition: survive a grueling 15-day ordeal locked within a sealed chamber, deprived entirely of sleep, and constantly exposed to a newly developed, experimental stimulant gas. This was not just an ordinary prison cell. It was a laboratory designed to push the boundaries of human endurance. In the initial days, a semblance of normalcy, or at least a deceptive calm, permeated the chamber. The prisoners engaged in conversation, their voices echoing through the microphones that connected them to the unseen researchers. There were moments of strained laughter, and a fragile cooperation seemed to exist between them and their silent observers. However, this fragile peace was short-lived. By the 5th day, a creeping, insidious paranoia began to fester within the confined space. The easy conversations devolved into anxious whispers, then into an unsettling silence, broken only by the sporadic, terrifying outbursts of screams. The stimulant gas, rather than merely keeping them awake, seemed to be actively unraveling their minds. The horror escalated dramatically. One prisoner, in a fit of unimaginable torment, reportedly tore out his own vocal cords, silencing his screams in a gruesome display of self-mutilation. Others, driven by an unholy hunger, began to rip flesh from their own bodies, succumbing to a horrific form of self-cannibalism. The descriptions of their descent into madness are nothing short of nightmarish. When the chamber was finally breached, the scene that greeted the scientists was one of indescribable carnage. Mutilated figures, their faces twisted into grotesque, unnatural smiles. One of the surviving subjects, now utterly deranged, inexplicably begged to be returned to the gas. Another, in a moment that solidified the story's chilling legacy, whispered the haunting words, "We are the madness that lurks within you all." It was a tale of unspeakable horror, a descent into madness that, according to the story, never truly slept. Despite its deeply unsettling nature, the Russian sleep experiment wasn't a lost Cold War file. The chilling truth is, this narrative emerged decades later, from the vast, murky depths of the internet. It first appeared anonymously on creepypasta.com in 2010, a website known for hosting user-submitted horror stories. It was just text, no photos, no proof, nothing to substantiate it. Yet, it possessed an uncanny ability to captivate and disturb. Readers either believed it, or at least, desperately wanted to. It spread like wildfire. Reddit threads debated its authenticity. YouTubers adapted it into short films. Artists created chilling illustrations, and the line between fiction and reality began to blur. The tone felt clinical, cold, like it was pulled straight from a declassified Soviet archive. That's what made it stick. Not because it was real, but because it could have been. So, could such an experiment actually happen? And more importantly, could someone survive it? Scientifically, the answer is an emphatic no. The human body and mind are simply not designed to endure such an extreme ordeal. Sleep is absolutely vital. After just 24 hours without it, the brain slows down significantly, affecting cognitive function. By 72 hours, hallucinations, memory loss, and confusion begin to set in. Go much longer, and your body starts to shut down completely, leading to immune system collapse and organ failure. In 1964, Randy Gardner stayed awake for 11 days, a documented record. He experienced slurred speech, paranoia, and even delusions. But there was no cannibalism, no superhuman endurance, and he was under constant medical supervision. No gas on Earth could possibly override the brain's fundamental need for sleep. What the story describes utterly defies biology. So, why does this story feel real? Because when it comes to horrific human experimentation, the Soviet Union didn't need to make up monsters. It created them. The real history is already terrifying enough. During the Cold War, the USSR became a breeding ground for secret experiments, many of them psychological, invasive, and morally nightmarish. Sleep deprivation was real. So was isolation, forced silence, and chemical manipulation. Not in fictional chambers, but in actual institutions, where scientists played with the limits of human endurance like children breaking toys. And it wasn't just the Soviets. The United States had its own skeletons, Project MK Ultra being the most infamous, using LSD, sensory deprivation, and hypnosis in an attempt to control the human mind. The idea of turning people into obedient, memory-wiped vessels wasn't science fiction, it was military ambition. Back in the USSR, rumors swirled about classified facilities, where soldiers were broken and rebuilt, where prisoners were subjected to soundproof rooms, starvation, experimental drugs, and yes, gases meant to manipulate behavior. There's little evidence that any sleep gas existed, But that's the thing, the lack of documentation only fuels the myth, because the Soviet Union operated in total secrecy. If something awful did happen behind closed doors, the world would never know. And that's the key. The image of the USSR, cold, clinical, unflinchingly brutal, is exactly what gives this story its power. We already expect horror from behind concrete walls and red stars. The Russian sleep experiment feels like something they could have done, and sometimes, could is scarier than did. So why did millions believe this story? Not just for entertainment, but deep down, because it plays on something primal. We fear losing control, and sleep, or the lack of it, is the ultimate loss of control. It breaks the barrier between mind and madness, turns men into monsters, without touching a single nerve. This story doesn't use jump scares or gore. It whispers something darker. You could be next. That's why it worked. It's a story about how fragile we really are, how a little gas and a little isolation can turn anyone into a monster. Today, the unsettling tale of the Russian sleep experiment continues to thrive, transcending its origins as a simple creepypasta. It lives on powerfully in a myriad of forms, from chilling short films and detailed documentaries to fan fiction, unsettling illustrations, and even elements integrated into video games. It's been retold, reinterpreted, and reimagined countless times across various platforms, each new iteration adding another layer to its enduring and unsettling legacy. And here's the most fascinating part. Even though it's been definitively proven to be entirely fake, a cleverly crafted lie, it stubbornly refuses to die. Why does a demonstrably false story persist with such tenacity? Because at this point, the Russian sleep experiment is no longer just a mere story. It has evolved into something far more significant and impactful. It's become a mirror, reflecting our own deepest fears and anxieties about human nature and unchecked scientific ambition. It functions as a modern myth, embodying timeless themes of psychological vulnerability and the potential for unimaginable cruelty. Most importantly, it serves as a stark warning. It reminds us just how easily fear can be weaponized in the digital age, how subtly and powerfully truth can be bent and distorted when a compelling and terrifying narrative enters the collective consciousness. It shows us how even the most absurd legends can gain an unsettling sense of reality when they are skillfully wrapped in the right layers of fabricated authenticity and psychological dread. Today, the Russian sleep experiment still lingers, not just as a story, but as a digital ghost. It's been reimagined through YouTube horror shorts, video game lore, graphic novels, AI art, even podcasts pretending to uncover long-lost Soviet tapes. It's everywhere, haunting forums, comment sections, Reddit threads. Despite being entirely fake, it thrives. Why? Because at this point, it's bigger than truth. It taps into something deeply human, our fear of what we might become, if stripped of comfort, sleep, and sanity. It echoes real tragedies, real cruelties, and wraps them in just enough fiction to bypass our skepticism. It doesn't need to be factual, it just needs to feel plausible. In a digital age, where fear can spread like a virus, the Russian sleep experiment stands as proof that a good story, told well, can eclipse reality. That a myth, crafted with just the right amount of dread and detail, can dig into our minds and refuse to leave. There was no gas, no whispers behind steel walls, no men who chose madness over mercy, just an idea, a terrifying idea. And sometimes, that's all it takes.